So, hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Talking Asperger's with Andrew. I'm Andrew Marsh. It's my series of Zoom calls with my wife, Leslie, who comes along and helps and keeps me straight. And it's actually quite interesting because when we talk about something, Leslie will jump in with something, giving me the example of the thing I'm trying to convey to you. So it helps. It's good to have Leslie on board. So what I was going to talk to you about today is one of the positive traits of people who have Asperger's syndrome, and that is attention to detail. And I was just going to share very briefly with you one of the examples that I have. I used to work as a geologist, and quite often we would have an awful lot of information, which would be borehole records, trial pits, testing, maps, historical information, a whole raft of information about a site. So I was always one for getting into the detail of what we had. So I would make up tables and charts long before we had computers. So this was all done on the desktop and on maps and plans and drawings. And I would immerse myself in it and summarize all the relevant data so that I could understand what was happening, because then we would then have to write the interpretive report and things like that. So it's something that kind of coupled with what we spoke about last week, which was focus, is in getting into the nitty-gritty and the detail of the jobs that I was working on. It just, I don't know, it was a thrill. It was actually a thrill to be able to be given the time, which is also important, to be able to sit down and understand the information that you have and then make sense of it. And I was wondering whether anyone on the call had similar examples of how they were particularly attracted to the detail of a situation. Perhaps Laura, you might want to share something with us.
Are you talking about what we were discussing on the chat, like finding clues at all times?
Yeah, you can talk about that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are times when I just focus on details. Maybe I am in a situation, maybe I'm just looking at something and I find some small things very meaningful to me, and I try to connect those to what I know already or to something else that is extremely important to me at the moment, and try to make sense of it, just like if it were sort of a message to me or something meaningful to me, something that makes sense to my life.
Yeah,
yeah. Am I answering your question? I'm not sure about that.
Okay, well, it's putting the pieces together, and I tend to mind map things. So I would sort of write down or make notes of where things were, and then see how the pattern all fitted together. Yeah, Leslie.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you, Laura? Is it a case of that the more detail you have, you feel more comfortable in what you're doing and how you can relay that information?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if I have more details, if I have more information, I can actually feel much more comfortable with what I'm saying, with what I'm reading, or whatever it is. But if the pieces are quite far distant, like very distant one from the other one, sometimes I may actually like make my own picture, but it's not that it always is. It always connects to the truth. You know what I mean? I may actually put the pieces together, but not getting to the truth.
No,
I don't know if I explain myself correctly. Sometimes I don't have information enough, so I do what I can with what I have.
Well, that's actually another very important point about people with Asperger's, and that sometimes they get lost by some of their colleagues at work, is we're absolutely trying to do the best we can with what we have. And that's really important that people understand that when you're working with someone who has Asperger's, is they absolutely want to do the best job possible. And so they will pull out all the stops. They will really concentrate and focus on what they're doing. And if you find that when you get the report back, or the whatever the task was that you gave them to do, and it isn't quite what you wanted, that could be because there's been a communication breakdown between you and the person that you've asked to work, the person with Asperger's, because they haven't deliberately set out to make something wrong or do something wrong. And that's actually a really important point. I do a weekly post on LinkedIn, and that was a point I made a couple of weeks ago, is doing the best they can with what they have. And that's an important point. So thanks for bringing that up.
As far as it goes for communication, though, it's got to do with the parameters
Yes,
that you're dealing with.
absolutely.
If you have absolute parameters, you need 4 square. And in that box is what you're looking for, or what the person who's asking you to do the job is looking for. And that's what you'll focus on. That's where you'll find your detail, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else got a similar experience they'd like to share with us? Damien?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure it's the same, but it could be. When I'm doing a study, or when I'm looking at a problem at work, for instance, maybe a disease or something that I'm looking at, in order to reach the goal of finding whatever my goal is, I like to have almost be able to imagine first a structure of the investigation, where I'll start, where I'll end. Then I like to have to understand fully all the potential variabilities that could come in place into that, like almost like a box, where I see the parameters of the study. And I find that I'm not comfortable until I know all the detail. So I'll often sort of go on and on and on, and not feel that I don't understand anything, or can't progress until I have what I feel is enough understanding of the parameters and what I'm trying to achieve. So I'll go into a lot of detail and spend a lot of time producing a plan, and then looking for variability, looking for detail in that.
Yeah. It's very similar to what I was doing as a geologist. You're putting all of these technical parameters and detail into a way that works for you, that you can understand it, and you want to really be sure that you do understand it. What happens if certain parameters are variable, or if there's a slight change in something, how that impacts on the whole story. So that's
yes,
definitely something that I do, and I think other people with Asperger's do as well.
I'm not sure whether it's another example. I choose one out of work. People often comment when I go walking a lot in the mountains, and when I come back with my photographs, they tend to be full of a lot of photographs of detail of a small plant or a small bit of wood or something else, not many of sort of the landscape at large. So I'm not sure whether that's related, but I tend to love the detail rather than the necessarily.
So basically, you will actually look at the whole, but in detail. And that,
yes, so I come back with a picture of a little plant in the detail in the space where it is, or some wood that I find the patterns on the wood interesting, or some rocks that I find I like. The shapes or the patterns in the rocks, and those.
I completely relate to that. I'm always out and about looking at rocks, and I will pick up pebbles. It's strange with pebbles and rocks and formations. There's a certain form about them in the way that they look, their shape, their texture, the surface, whether it's smooth or it's rough, whether they're layered or whether there's shiny bits in it. And all of this comes together in a complete set of parameters that I find very hard to define. When someone says to me, why did you like that piece of rock as opposed to that piece of rock? And I just say, well, it feels nicer, it feels right. And I can relate more to one piece of rock, one inanimate piece of rock, than I can to another. And people look at me sometimes and think you're crazy, but it's just a sensation that that's the piece of rock or the stone or the pebble on the beach that I want to pick up, and not the 10 that are around it. Yeah.
Just a funny connection there. I don't know that much about rocks or the geology of them, but every time I go out walking, I tend to collect one rock that I like, and as a reminder of a particular mountain or somewhere I've been. And so people laugh at me because I have about 100 paperweights in the office, which rocks around the place, and people ask, why do you collect them? And I under each one, I have the date and where I collected it from, but I can't give a complete reason why I collect them.
No. And does Amy or Chris got something that they'd like to share with us?
Yes, I think this is fabulous. This is like coming home and being with friends. I don't have a diagnosis, but I recognize everything you're saying. And, you know, the attention to detail and the looking for patterns is exactly what I do. I work a lot with standards. I don't need every detail. I can speed read a standard and not read every word, but I'm looking for the trajectory into a solution to a problem I have. But I think you also mentioned about having a thought process where you're looking at consequences. And this is where I think I get stuck into a lot of detail. People don't understand the importance of what I'm looking for, but for me, it's got a consequence, a risk outcome that they haven't seen.
Yes.
And I think that is a really powerful thing that we can add.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, Chris, because I see in Andrew a lot that he's hyper aware.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond even, and I can be pernickety, but it goes beyond even that, and that's saying something. And I think he's described it as having like a bank of television sets in his head, and each one of them is on a different channel.
Yes.
And he's kind of watching them all at the same time, also looking for patterns. Now, one of the interesting things with details, and he asked me today, he said, we're going to do details, Leslie. Is there anything that you can think of detail orientated that I do? And I went, oh yeah, right away. Got it right away. What's that? You turn all your coins up, face up.
Yeah, I have to have all my coins head up. I cannot on my desk have a coin tails up. I have to have it heads up. It's
if I come in and I very cheekily turn one up the other way, he notices right away. It's almost like he has an idea. He knows exactly what is there. The picture is there and how it should be. And if anything changes, it's like, hang on a minute, that's not right.
Yeah, that thing,
the comfort thing too. It's like a security thing.
Yeah, that one item that is out of place will be going off like a big alarm bell in my head. It'll be going clang, 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 clang. Something's out of place. And it was the same when I was a kid, long before I was diagnosed with Asperger's. If someone had been into my bedroom and borrowed a book or borrowed a record or a CD, I would know just by looking in my room, someone's borrowed a book because they haven't put it back in the right place. It's not quite square, or it's not quite lined up, or it's to the left of where it should have been. I will know just by looking. I have this, I don't know, it's like a scanning technique. When I go into a room, it's like I scan with all of my senses, including the hidden ones, what is going on in that room, and I will
the human Geiger counter.
And I will notice something if something's not right. Amy, did you want to say something there?
No, one thought it was really interesting just listen to everybody.
I was going to ask you, Andrew, as far as Amy's concerned, particularly, how does that hypersensitivity, that hyper awareness to detail, to that understanding where the pattern is different, how does that help when it comes to working with neurotypical people?
It's interesting because in work, the biggest issues that I had at work were being around other people. Some people I got on with great, absolutely fine, but there were other people, certain people that just somehow were great, that I would grate against them or they were great against me. And there would be sort of some kind of semi-unwritten rule of conduct of almost a conflict. And I'm definitely trying not to be confrontational in the office, that how something should be done. And it depended on whether they were more senior to me than not. And if they were more senior, that was where I had the real trouble. Because trying to explain to someone, I want to do it this way because, and then give the examples of how I want to set it out, how I want to understand it, what we were talking about earlier, so that I have an image, a picture, an understanding of the data in my head, of the site and of the parameters and all of those things that we talked about. and I want to do it this way. And one of them particular, and I'm not mentioning names, one of them in particular just was not interested in that. And we actually had quite some interesting discussions that were arguments, really. He tended to take the view that this job is similar to the job we did last month or last year. So do the report the same as that one. Now, that might be fine some of the time, but there will be details that are different parameters, different technical parameters, different water conditions, a whole host of technical soil parameters that will be different. And I would say, but we can't do it the same as that because X, Y, and Z. And he said, I don't care. I just want it done like we did the last one. And on one particular occasion, when I was exasperated to the point of wanting to explode, I actually said to him, has anyone checked with the people that built it and the client at the end of it, whether what we did and what we gave them worked on site, whether it was right, or did they have to make changes on site because the conditions weren't behaving as we expected, or they were having problems? Has anyone ever checked that? Because if we haven't checked that, then we can't just blindly go on doing the same thing over and over again, making the same mistakes over and over again. We have to understand and be specific about the job that we're doing. And he just would not do it. And
the tension that comes from that comes from your idea of taking on responsibility for your job, your actions.
Yeah.
How you perceive your responsibility.
Yeah.
I think that is possibly where Damien and Laura, who have been on with us before from the beginning, we kind of know what they're doing, that Chris and Amy don't. So it might be an idea perhaps for us to allow that to happen. Damien, you're in a science situation, aren't you? You're a researcher.
Semi, although I work on for a farm producing salads for a supermarket as well. So I do some research and I of course work as a technical manager for dealing with the customers as well as internal, making sure that we follow the correct standards and procedures, which could also create problems for me because I like to follow the exact precise wording of the procedures, and other people says, well, even it says 2 hours, it can be, no, doesn't have to be 2 hours. It doesn't mean 2 hours. And I say, well, if it says 2 hours, that's what it is.
Yeah, that's something that is noticeable with everyone.
I get in a lot of arguments about detail of people say I'm difficult because
I can completely understand that. Yeah.
That comes into communication, doesn't it? Because
I fall down heavily on communication. I can spend, like this week, I spent about 2 days on a report, and then I had to present it, and then to the directors, and the way the meeting was organized was different to what I thought. I wasn't able to present it as well as I had. I wasn't able to present what I had achieved because they didn't want to present it in that way. They wanted something else. And I was prepared for a particular scenario, so it was a bit more difficult for me to adapt.
How did it feel, Damien?
It felt like it felt that I wasn't able to present the work that I'd put in to the study, to the report, and it felt that I felt that they would see that I hadn't worked hard on the report, and it felt frustrating.
Yeah.
Not being able to put across what I wanted to put across.
So you need to be given time when you're working and you've been given a job to do. You need to be given time if there are any changes involved that are unexpected.
No, it was the change in the parameter, change in what was once required when I wanted to present the whole thing, the detail, the thing, and the directors didn't really want to hear detail, or they just wanted
a high level summary.
High summary, which wasn't very and they wanted to brisk over detail, which I thought the detail was important. So in order, I felt that you had to know the detail to follow the procedure, otherwise it wasn't worth presenting something. It wasn't worth transmitting that information to other people unless people have
But-
understood the full information.
Laura,
So-
what about you? Do you have the same kind of situation going on?
Well, not now, luckily enough, but before I had quite a few issues at work. For example, when giving instructions, I remember that the boss was like changing the instruction every day and changing our schedule every day. So also my lessons were changing every day. Also, I remember that when I was teaching in class, sometimes some teachers would just show up and say, I need to speak to that student now, or I should take some students away for a second because I need to speak to them, or they need to do something else. And that would bother me a lot because they were interrupting first. Second, they were taking the students away when they were supposed to learn with me. And third thing, everything was changing, like the whole setting. And also the students at some point just got, they took advantage of this situation. They started like lying to me sometimes, like saying, oh, that teacher told me he needs to talk to me, so I have to leave your lesson. And I was like, oh, okay, but that wasn't true. Because working with teenagers, you know, it's it's extremely difficult, and they may lie a lot, lots of the most of the time probably. So there was a lot going on, and that's also the reason why I left my job and I found this new one. Yeah.
What about you, Chris? What's your background? What do you do?
I mainly deal with compliance and competence requirements for industry requirements and regulations and standards. It was very interesting what you said about responsibility, because I work in an area where impartiality and integrity are really important parts of the products and services for customer benefit. And I do struggle with other people who don't read the rules. It's not about being rule bound, it's understanding what the rules are. And these things are openly published and people can't be bothered to read them. Now, you can act as the guardian of that for them, but eventually you come head to head where they don't understand why you're advising a decision or a solution or an outcome, because they don't understand the rules. And they don't seem to carry the same level of responsibility for that impartiality requirement. And it's a massive conflict. For me, it's absolutely clear. And it's not that there are no options. It's not about being rule bound, but it's about being clear what that impartiality thread needs to be, and then working around it to achieve it. And I come across so many people that have no understanding what that means. They think impartiality is not accepting money in a brown paper bag to do something illegal. That's corruption. We're talking about just doing something that's not for yourself, it's for the benefit of the customer.
Yeah, I completely understand that. It's from when I worked as a geologist, the situations that I found myself in when people were just trying to bulk against the rules or against how things should be done, and as you say that they just weren't interested in the detail.
Well, I think we've got ourselves into an issue where everybody thinks that they're an entrepreneur, and being entrepreneurial means you can act without regard to any rules or controls. And that's not true, because when you look at the most successful entrepreneurs, they've applied constraints to give themselves direction and control. It can't be completely open, otherwise you'd never achieve anything. And I think there's a problem of definition of entrepreneurial. People who focus on correct outcomes and delivering what the controls require are seen as not creative. And this causes me some difficulties.
It is a minefield when you're having to work for other people and put across an opinion, and you're happy with how you've gone about it. You've looked at the standards, you've looked at the rules, you've complied with the standardized approach, and then you come up against someone who isn't interested in that. They just want something that looks nice and doesn't necessarily address the detail of why you've done it in a certain way. And their lack of comprehension is I find baffling sometimes. And I did have real problems with some people in that sense. I want to briefly get towards wrapping up, which we unbelievable how quickly time has flown. But I wanted to talk about, I think we've all touched on the understanding that a manager has working with someone who has Asperger's. And I think it's very important that you get those clear lines of communication nailed at the start. And I have a course that I've got prepared, that it's available on Thinkific, which is on how to manage people with Asperger's syndrome at work. And the first step is one of the most important, and that's called the brief. And I'll just take a moment to just go through that. If you're let's just take this example of you're a client and you want a building, you want a 20-story block of flats built in a city center environment. So you have a consulting engineer or an architect, and you say, right, you've won the bid for this job. Okay, you know all the technical specifications and everything, but you would sit down with that client. That client would want to sit down with you in a room with your project manager, your project director, and their team, and just talk about the job. You would want to get a feel for who they were, feel for what they wanted, and understand the job. Not just the technical specs that you can fill out in the tender document, but actually sit down and understand that job. So that opening salvo, that beginning, is the most important step. And it's so important at that step that you allow the person with Asperger's syndrome the time to ask questions. You talk to them about what they're going to do. It's a great idea to have a checklist so that you go through things one point by point, one point at a time. And you allow that person the time to ask questions. Sorry. The thing that can be the sticking point there is that person with Asperger's has been assimilating all that you've told them. And so when you say, have you got any questions about that? They might sit there in silence. And there might be absolutely nothing. They're not ignoring you. They have just tried to process all of that information you've given them, run it around their head, which is doing its computer best to process fast and fast and fast, so that they can come out with the questions that they want to ask. And you have to give them the time to have that thinking time. They're not trying to avoid asking questions. They're not trying to ignore you. They are processing what you've asked them to do. They will then come out with questions that you might probably not have expected. It will be a killer question about something, about the job that you've asked them to do. And it's really important to have that process at the beginning of the brief, to sit down with the person with Asperger's and set out in detail what you want them to do, when you want them to do it by, what support they have if they've got other members of staff, how those communication lines are forged, who's responsible for those. Is there any computing software or IT required? Do they need to go and use the machine in the corner that's got the technical software on? If so, have they been trained on it? It's no point just saying to someone, anyone, let alone someone with Asperger's, the program's on that computer over there, off you go. That's not good management. So you have to be very specific about what you're asking them to do. And if there's computer programs or that they need, make sure they're trained in that first. So that's the first step. And I think the first step in setting out the task with the person with Asperger's is so important when working with them, so that they understand what you want them to do. So has anyone got any other questions they want to ask me just before we wrap up for the day?
No, not for me, thank you.
Thank you, Amy, for coming along. It's good to have you on board. Hope to see you again sometime soon.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. And so what I will leave you with is just as a if you like, a message of hope that I have is that when we understand the people that we work with, whether they're on the spectrum or not, but when we understand the people around us and the people that we work with, it is more than likely certain that you will get a better job. So it's really important to take the time to understand who you're working with, who they are, what are their drivers, what are their sensitivities, what are their triggers. I had one particular chap I worked with who was senior to me, hated someone coming up to him and standing at his desk to ask him a question. It's natural that we would need to ask him a question. So we would have to phone him. Although he might be, you could see him in the office, we would have to phone him because he hated someone coming up and standing in front of his desk. So it's important that we understand how each other ticks and what makes them work. And if we can all do that and we can understand each other better, know our lines of communication, who to ask when we've got a question or a problem or an issue with what we're doing, then we are going to be better at delivering what we need to deliver within the teams and then to our clients in the broader sense. So thank you all for coming along. It's been a pleasure having you on board. And next week I will be covering one of the positive traits of Asperger syndrome. I will have a look at it and I will post it on the event on LinkedIn by Friday. Probably Friday I will do that. But thank you all for coming. It's been good to see you and hope to see you all again. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.
Hi, Leslie.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.